Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I'm your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder, and last time I covered the opening shots to the Battle of Gettysburg. Now I'll move into the major engagements taking place on the first day. Keep in mind that this part of the fight at McPherson's Ridge, the fighting on Oak Ridge, and the engagement at Barlow's Knoll were happening at roughly the same time. It gets a little complicated, but because I want to include so much detail into the battle, I cover it in 3 separate stages. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from one of my online stores. Every little bit helps. Thank you. After Archer had been repulsed around Willoughby Run, a lull came over that sector of the battlefield as more and more troops swarmed the area. North of the Chambersburg Pike, Robert Rhodes and his division were attempting to break the Union line on Oak Ridge. Directly north of the town, Jubal Early's division moved toward the Union's 11th Corps troops to a location known as Barlow's Knoll. Meanwhile, the Iron Brigade, fresh off their victory against Archer, formed in Herbst Woods, to the west of McPherson's Ridge. All 3 fights at Oak Ridge, Barlow's Knoll, and McPherson's Ridge took place at roughly the same time. The positioning of the Iron Brigade was awkward for the men in the wooded terrain, and multiple officers approached the commander of the brigade, Solomon Meredith, to complain about their position and suggested seeking better ground. Each complaint was met with basically the same response. They were to hold this position at all hazards. Confederate Major General Henry Heath prepared his division for another assault, this time sending in his 2 other brigades, Virginians under Brockenbrough, and a large North Carolina brigade under Pettigrew. Colonel Burkett Fry, commanding Archer's brigade, would form on the right. The first to come into contact with the Union troops was the 840-man regiment of the 26th North Carolina, which barreled toward the Iron Brigade's left flank. The rest of Pettigrew's regiments advanced in echelon. The Union Brigade remembered that the rebels advanced toward them yelling like demons, and the 2 sides delivered volleys into one another at point-blank range. The 11th North Carolina advanced across Willoughby Run and gave further concern to the Northerners by overlapping their left flank. The 2 sides slugged it out, the 19th Indiana losing about 40% of its force, and the 11th North Carolina sustaining horrible losses as well. One of the Tar Heel companies entered the fight with 38 men, but only 4 remained unhurt at the end of July 1st. Pettigrew's brigade was one of the largest in the army, but Brockenbrough's was one of the smallest and arguably the least reliable. They would advance a short distance, fall to the ground, then rise up to advance once again. The Virginians made 2 half-hearted attempts to engage the Union regiments in their front, but did nothing more. Meanwhile, Pettigrew's men forced the 19th Indiana to fall back due to pressure on their flank. The Iron Brigade's commander was wounded by an artillery shell, causing further chaos in the ranks. The only thing saving the Iron Brigade was the lackluster attacks by Brockenbrough that could have overlapped their flank and forced the entire group back. In the center of the Confederate line, the 47th and 52nd North Carolina regiments advanced across the field ahead of them, letting their comrades deal with the Iron Brigade on the left. Fry's brigade advanced with them on the right, but when they saw the 8th Illinois Cavalry to their right, one of the last remnants of Buford's division on the field, they turned toward the cavalry and watched them. They didn't attack. An officer in the brigade, disgusted at what their commander was doing, wrote that his men acted as a body of observation instead of attacking the enemy. Seeing the desperate situation, the 151st Pennsylvania was rushed to the front to hopefully hold off the Confederate juggernaut, threatening every brigade on the field. In Herbst Woods, the 24th Michigan fell back and linked up with the 19th Indiana. The Iron Brigade was falling apart, and if it didn't withdraw quickly, it ran the risk of being captured. Biddle's brigade, which had been sent to reinforce the Iron Brigade, hadn't advanced far enough and remained behind McPherson's Ridge. They would barely see the advancing Confederates in their front. Because of their precarious position, the 52nd North Carolina outflanked them, and a desperate fight ensued. The Iron Brigade was getting flanked as well. They couldn't hold on any longer in Herbst Woods and begrudgingly fell back. With the Federals on the run, the Confederate regiments fired at the pockets of resistance still present on the field. Both sides commented on the hotness of their rifles from firing so many times. Some Union troops dropped their rifles to pick up wounded and dead men's rifles that were cooler. A member of the 11th North Carolina remembered that their weapons became so fouled because of the black powder residue that they had trouble ramming the charges home, so they resorted to picking up rocks to hit their ramrods in order to properly seat the cartridge. Biddle's men also fell back to the seminary. One soldier who fell back said the quarter-mile run to safety was probably the best on record. This left the 151st Pennsylvania almost alone. Even though this was their first battle, they had fought bravely and held on with the 142nd Pennsylvania. That regiment launched a counter-assault that killed its commander and ultimately killed more men in the foolhardy attempt, which contributed to them falling back in great disorder. Now the entire Union line was on the run, both sides paying a heavy price. The inexperienced 151st Pennsylvania lost nearly 60% of its force, and the 26th North Carolina lost 549 of the 840 men. Nearly 1,000 men were lost in Pettigrew's brigade in about 30 minutes. Chaos reigned on the field for the Confederates as well. The division commander, Henry Heath, had been wounded and knocked unconscious by a bullet to the head. The paper wadding stuffed in his hat probably saved his life. However, divisional command went to the inexperienced Johnston Pettigrew, and no further attack was launched. The Union troops didn't go far. They were preparing a defensive position on Seminary Ridge. Heath's division was not without support, however. Major General Dorsey Pender's division was approaching the field. Colonel Abner Perrin was inexperienced at brigade command because he had just taken over from the brigade commander Samuel McGowan, who had gotten wounded at Chancellorsville in May. Pender made sure to issue him specific orders. Pettigrew and Brockenbrough's men remained behind McPherson's Ridge to avoid the cannonading coming from Seminary Ridge. Although the Federal infantry were tired, the Federal artillery were fresh and ready to unleash a hail of iron into the approaching Confederate lines. Before Pender's men stepped off on their attack, Perrin gave some instructions to his men. Men, the order is to advance. You will go to the crest of the hill. If Heath does not need you, lie down and protect yourselves as well as you can. If he needs you, go to his assistance at once. Do not fire your guns. Give them the bayonet. If they run, then see if they will outrun the bullet. They stepped off for their attack, and immediately Federal artillery began sending shells into their lines. But as one South Carolina soldier remembered, they began throwing grape shot at us. By the bushel, it seems. They shot too high for us as the shot went over our heads. Had they been a little lower, I don't see how any of us could have escaped. Although the canister flew over their heads, the solid shot and shell did their grim work. A Union soldier remembered the 38th North Carolina, who advanced directly toward a battery, simply put their heads down as if marching against a hard wind when the cannons opened up on them. But they kept moving forward. Lane's brigade, like Fry's before, had become distracted by Buford's cavalry to their right, and only began to advance faster when Lane sent the 7th North Carolina to watch the cavalrymen. However, instead of heading for the Union troops at the seminary, Lane turned his men south, leaving Perrin and Scales to face the Union defenders. However, Scales ran into a sheet of flame and lead from the artillery and infantry opposing them. The destruction was so great that Scales' men had to fall back. They had been decimated, but the South Carolinians were pressing on. One member of Perrin's brigade recalled, "To stop was destruction, to retreat was disaster, to go forward was orders." Perrin was angered over the lack of support, but he had a determination that led him to victory that day. He split his brigade, sending the 1st and 14th South Carolina to the left of a gap between Biddle's brigade and Gamble's brigade. He sent the 13th and 12th South Carolina to the right to deal with Gamble's brigade. The 14th and 1st fired enfilading fire into the Union troops, and one by one they began to retreat, streaming into the town of Gettysburg. Eventually the entire line at Seminary Ridge was gone, and the Confederate brigade of South Carolinians stood victorious on the ridge. Just north of the Chambersburg Pike, Robert Rodes' division broke the Union line on Oak Ridge, and the brigades of Jubal Early were breaking the Union defenders north of town.